the Men by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. Chapter 19. Coralie's Journal. 4. Paternal Inspection. My dear aunt has certainly become an altered woman within the last week. She who was lately calm as a statue, composed, dignified, moving with queen-like motion through life that seemed to have lost all interest for her, now looks like a woman whose every nerve is strung to highest tension, whose delicate frame vibrates with suppressed energy. This sudden change from snow to fire interests me more than I can say. I take as much delight in trying to thread the mystery of this wonderful woman's mind as an enthusiastic pianist can feel in unraveling the web of a Beethoven sonata or a crabbed composition by Sebastian Bach. My whole mind is bent upon finding the secret springs of her action. Those inquiries among the cottagers at Cargill had assuredly something to do with the matter that so absorbs her. Not for nothing would she have been so keenly interested in a casual wayfarer, not for mere charity, were she as charitable as that Saint Helena about whom Mr. Coverdale told me some fairy tales yesterday evening across the billiard table. One of the symptoms of this transformation in Lady Penrith is her obvious desire to escape my companionship in her drives. I know you prefer going with the shooters, Cora. On 3 separate mornings, and thus instigated, I have gone with the shooters, for the Honourable and Reverend John is game worth stalking. And he is not so keen a sportsman as the other men. Indeed, no sportsman at all. I contrive to enjoy a good deal of his society, and I am getting as familiar with the romance of medieval saintliness in Rome and in the East as I am with the characters in Balzac's novels. Pleasant as it is, however, to tramp over brown heather and bracken, and to tear my pretty tweed frock among the furze bushes in this enlightening society, yet the very fact of her ladyship not wanting me has determined me to force my company upon her. So, yesterday, I met her usual remark about the shooters with a flat refusal. I am not going with them ever again, aunt, or at any rate not for ages, I answered. I dare say they are tired of me, and I know I am tired of them. All my sympathy is with the innocent birds they massacre, and why should I put myself in the way of having my feelings harrowed? Why, indeed, said my uncle, a remark I might have anticipated from him. I spoke with some soreness of feeling, for in all that tramping over the lumpy moor, and in all those prosy legends of impossible saints, the Reverend John has not committed himself to the faintest expression of admiration for me, the sinner. I am as far from the hope of winning his saintly affections as when I played my first game of billiards with him. No, aunt, no more long days with the guns for me, said I. If I don't bore you too much, I should like to share your drive this afternoon. Of course you don't bore me, Cora, but... My aunt's reluctance expressed itself so strongly in that monosyllable as to attract my uncle's attention. He looked at the speaker suddenly with keen, cold eyes. No doubt your aunt will be very glad to have you, he said. She must want your society in those dreary drives of hers more than we do." "Except at luncheon," put in Reggie Mountford, a callow subaltern at the Grenadiers, one of Lady Penrith's innumerable nephews. "We should miss you awfully with a lunch cart. You say such awfully good things, regular rowdy things. Oh, you needn't stare, Mr. Coverdale. The best things she says go over your head, but Villars and I are in the know, ain't we, Vill?" Mr. Villars, who might be this flippant brat's grandfather, assented with a nod. I felt that I had sunk fathoms deep in the estimation of the churchman, and I had the pleasure of hearing my uncle's scornful laugh as he rose from the breakfast table with a muttered, "My niece is her father's daughter." After luncheon, Lady Penrith informed me rather coldly that she was going to Ellerslie for a business interview with her land steward and general adviser, Mr. Orlebar, whom I have heard you speak of not too admiringly. She warned me that I would have a very dull afternoon, as she might be engaged for a long time. I assured her that my delight in seeing the house in which she was born and brought up would make dullness out of the question. She was right, however. I endured an afternoon of inexorable dreariness, since the amusement to be found in prowling about a great empty house and trying her ladyship's piano was exhausted in about 20 minutes. And then I had nothing to do but roam in the autumnal garden, count the chrysanthemums, and think over that odious young Mountford's impertinence. My regular rowdy speeches, forsooth! What is the use of having a sharp wit which seizes the ludicrous aspect of everything? I fear I have been a little weak in letting him talk of French novels and sensational cases in the divorce court before me, and putting in my pert little tongue occasionally. But what can one talk of in this end of the country, if not sensational cases, when every new case goes beyond the old ones in sensational elements? There is a feeling in the air as if it were not the end of the century, but the end of the world. I wandered about, solitary and disconsolate, thinking only of the unpleasantest things, and without so much as a cup of tea. Whatever the housekeeper was doing, she was too busy to think of poor me. It was past 6 o'clock when Lady Penrith came to me in the drawing-room, where I was trying to hammer out one of the mazurkas of Chopin's, which had been hammered into me at Madame Michon's, and which I now only remember in shreds and patches. The arts have not been propitious in my case. My musical education was a lamentable failure, and I was never able to produce the stiff chalk drawing which every pupil at Madame Michon's was supposed to execute with the aid of breadcrumbs and a patient master. Yet I think, for mere brains, I might pit myself against most of those underbred girls who used to sneer at my shabby frocks. Lady Penrith looked ill and miserable when she rejoined me after her 2 hours' conversation with her man of business. If their talk had been solely of money matters, one might suppose her on the brink of ruin. But I don't believe financial cares had anything to do with her low spirits. She scarcely spoke to me in the drive home, and she did not appear at dinner that evening. We were informed before dinner that her ladyship was suffering from a neuralgic headache and keeping quiet in her own rooms. The maiden aunt, Lady Selina Mountford, a portentous person in a point lace hood, like Juliet's nurse, had arrived while we were out, and I spent a dismal evening in the shadow of her respectability, and not daring to propose an adjournment to the billiard room, although that impertinent young guardsman asked me to join him in a game of pool. "You can play to me, Miss Urquhart, while I work," Lady Selina said curtly with a glance at the open piano. "Thank you, I don't play," replied I as curtly as she. "Indeed, I thought every young lady nowadays was a good pianist." "There are quite enough of them to make the piano a nuisance, but I happen to be an exception," I retorted, feeling every nerve set on edge by this horrid old woman in a shabby red velvet gown, ensconced in the most comfortable chair, my own pet chair, by the great medieval fireplace where rampant brass lions guard a wrought iron basket of blazing ship's timber, which casts an uncanny green and blue light on people's faces. Surrounded as we are with coal pits, I need hardly mention that it is the correct thing in gentlemen's houses to burn nothing but logs. Lady Selina settled down to a piece of the ugliest fancy work I ever remember seeing. A coarse olive green blanket into which she laboriously dug a huge carpet needle laden with orange worsted. It was just such a piece of work as one of the African chief's 100 wives might have chosen for the amusement of her leisure hours. Altogether hideous and savage. Perhaps that idea sent my random thoughts in a particular direction. "This detestable old woman is a Mountford," I said to myself. "She must know something about Braddon Mountford, who wrote the African book." At any rate, there would be some fun in questioning her. "I think you had an African traveller among your relations some years ago, Lady Selina," said I, squatting on a stool at her feet, as if I loved her. "Most young men travel in Africa nowadays," she answered. "It is part of a liberal education." A troubled look had come into her face, and I could see that she was shuffling with me. "Ah, but you must know all about this one, a Mr. Braddon Mountford, who wrote a book of travels. Do tell me something about him." "There is nothing to tell, except that he was a distant relation of mine, and that he died many years ago." "Did he die in Africa?" "No." "Oh." Her manner was so forbidding that I dared not ask another question. She dug her skewer into the green serge. Oh, such a bilious colour, as if she would like to dig it into me. She looked like a witch, with the blue and green flames reflected upon her red gown, a horrible lurid figure, a horrible blue-green face. There is evidently some tragic story to be told about Braddon Mountford, some misfortune or even disgrace which involves Lady Penrith. I dare say you know all about it, and will grin when you read this diary. But when we next meet, I shall insist upon your telling me all you know. I might question the maid who dresses me, and who is most likely to be posted in all scandals affecting the family, but I make it a rule of my life never to be confidential with the servants. It doesn't pay. The poorer one is, the more uppish one ought to be. This morning, Lady Penrith reappeared, none the worse for yesterday's headache. After breakfast, she informed Lady Selina that the barouche would be at her disposal for the morning or the afternoon, as she might prefer, and I would go with her. Cora is fond of driving, she said. But I hope you'll come too, Aunt, said I. Not today, Cora. My aunt will excuse me. I'm going to see some people beyond Ardliston. But we could drive all that way, I suggested. It would not be worthwhile. I should keep you waiting too long. You can take Lady Selina round by Hanborough Point. Lady Selina protested that she adored the scenery around Callander Castle, so wild, so deliciously bleak and barren, so unlike Berkshire, where she had just been staying with Mrs. Tilbury, St. George, another niece. As the days were growing short, she preferred driving in the morning, she told me off to sit and talk twaddle with this odious spinster, who entertained me with an endless web of prosiness about her quarrel with Mrs. Tilbury, St. George's maid, who had waited on her, Lady Selina, during her own maid's holiday, and had been guilty of various offences against the ancient spinster's dignity, and had never brought her morning tea before 8 o'clock. My niece is a fine horsewoman, and hunts 4 days a week, concluded Lady Selina, so one can't be surprised that there is laxity in her household. She notices the slightest shortcomings in the stables, but permits chaos in her house. At luncheon, Lady Penrith looked preoccupied and excited. She left the table with an apology before her aunt had finished nibbling a bannock with her cheese, and 5 minutes afterwards I heard her light pony cart drive away. More inquiries, I suppose, and farther afield. I was not to be beaten as easily as her ladyship thought. I determined on a skirmishing round in the direction of Lady Penrith, beyond Ardliston. There are 2 or 3 poor little villages within a mile or so of that wretched place. I might gain upon the carriage by a short cut across the moor, and contrive to meet her ladyship in a guileless, unpremeditated way. Those long tramps with the shooters, if they have been no other gain to me, I have at least enjoyed being a good walker. I am in training for 20 miles a day. 6 or 7 miles across the moor are nothing to me. And then what a blessing to escape from Lady Selina, who had established herself again in my favourite chair, by the drawing-room fire. Olive green tapestry, and all en règle. Not a word, said I, to this Medusa, lest she should offer to accompany me, for those active, busybodyish old women can sometimes walk as well as the youngest. I slipped out of the drawing room, found a hat and jacket in the hall, and started off at a good 4 miles an hour across the hills to Ardliston, where I arrived just in time to see her ladyship's pony carriage disappear over the crest of a further hill in the direction of Allen Bay. On one side of the bay, there is a miserable concatenation of fishermen's huts and a churchyard with 2 old wind-blown firs, gaunt and distorted, their great bent arms curving inward as if beckoning the dead from the depths of the sea. Come here and rest in the calm, quiet earth, they seem to say. Don't laugh at this dropping into poetry on my part. I am only quoting the Reverend John, who showed me a watercolour drawing he had made of the churchyard and fir trees, and confided his sentimental notion about those wind-warped branches. He has all the accomplishments, paints charmingly, fiddles a little, knows Beethoven and Mozart as well as I know Balzac and Dumas, and hangs enraptured over Lady Penrith's piano whenever she condescends to play to us poor creatures in the drawing-room, which is not often. She prefers communicating with the spirit of melancholy in the seclusion of her morning room. That village over the hill, St. Jude's, is the wretched hole's name, is a good 7 miles from Ardliston. It was useless for me to attempt to follow Lady Penrith's carriage, so I crossed the moor again and walked slowly back, not altogether baffled, for I had at least discovered the direction of her ladyship's drives. End of chapter 19.